At exactly 9 p.m. on March 4th, 2008, a call came into 911 that would send shockwaves through a quiet college town. A passerby had spotted a young woman lying motionless on the side of the road. Her body was bruised and barely breathing, struggling to stay alive. Drivers who pulled over to help could barely make sense of what they were seeing. When the first police unit arrived minutes later, it was clear. This was no ordinary accident. The woman, later identified as Lauren Burke, was slipping away. With every second that passed, her life hung by a thread. But who could have done this to her? And why? Lauren Burke was 18 years old when her life was tragically cut short. She came from a small suburban town in Marietta, Georgia, where she was surrounded by the love of her family. Her parents, James and Vivian, had split up, but Lauren stayed close to both of them, maintaining a strong bond despite the changes in their family dynamic. She also had two siblings, Jacqueline and Chad, with whom she shared a typical sibling relationship, sometimes challenging, but always filled with love and support. Even after the divorce, her parents remained active in her life, offering guidance and encouragement as she grew into a young adult. Lauren wasn't just known for her background, but for the kind of person she was. She had a presence that made her stand out in any room. Whether she was interacting with her classmates, teammates, or family, she brought a lightness that drew people to her. Her friends often described her as someone with an infectious smile, someone who was always willing to lend a hand and go the extra mile for others. Her genuine kindness made her the kind of person people wanted to be around. Lauren was also incredibly driven. She had big dreams and wasn't afraid to work hard to achieve them. In school, she was known for being smart, focused, and always putting in the effort. Her passion for art led her to pursue a degree in graphic design at Auburn University, where she quickly made a name for herself. Lauren wasn't the type of person who sat back. She took every opportunity to get involved. She joined the Delta Gamma sorority, where she formed close friendships and built a strong support network. Alongside her academic and social life, Lauren had a passion for sports. She played lacrosse with impressive skill, showing both dedication and determination. It wasn't just about winning for her. It was about teamwork, pushing herself, and enjoying the process. Her ability to balance everything, studies, friendships, sports, was part of what made her unique. But above all, Lauren had Sean McQuaid by her side. Sean wasn't just her boyfriend. He was her partner, someone who shared her dreams and ambitions. They had been together since high school, and even as they navigated the challenges of college life, they made their relationship a priority. They talked about their future together, how they'd build their lives side by side, both professionally and personally. Sean was a constant in her life, and their bond was something both of them cherished deeply. Lauren was, in every sense, a bright, talented, and driven young woman who had everything ahead of her. She had plans, hopes, and a future she was excited about, until that fateful night when everything changed. March 4th, 2008 began as just another ordinary day for Lauren. She woke up early, ready for the day ahead, and had breakfast at a cafe with her boyfriend, Sean. They shared a lighthearted conversation, something they often did in the mornings. Afterward, Lauren headed off to class, where she spent a few hours focused on her studies. She was always the type to engage with her professors and classmates, making the most of every lesson. Around mid-morning, Lauren made a routine phone call to her father, James. It was a simple chat about their plans for spring break and a quick reminder about a dentist appointment she had coming up. The conversation was normal, the kind of small talk that parents and children have, filled with love and care. After that call, Lauren was ready to continue with her day. Later, she met up with Sean again, and the two spent the afternoon together. They talked about life, their future, and just enjoyed each other's company. It was a peaceful, quiet afternoon, the kind of time you wish could last forever. But as the evening came, Lauren had other commitments. At 8 p.m., she said goodbye to Sean, knowing she had an academic meeting at the library with a classmate, Michael, at 8:30 p.m. The plan was simple: work on a study assignment, and go home afterward. It was a regular part of her routine, and there was no reason to think anything would go wrong. However, something strange happened that evening. When Lauren didn't show up for her library meeting, Michael tried calling her phone. The first few calls went unanswered, and his concern began to grow. He called again, but this time, Lauren picked up. Her voice sounded odd, distant, and rushed. She quickly told Michael she had completely forgotten about their meeting and wouldn't be coming to the library. Before he could ask anything more, the call abruptly ended. Michael was left confused, sensing something wasn't quite right, but unable to put his finger on what it was. He figured Lauren was just busy, distracted, or caught up with something else. At that moment, no one knew that it would be the last time anyone would hear from Lauren. As the clock ticked closer to 9 p.m., a passerby drove along Highway 147, unaware of the horrors that awaited. When the individual's eyes caught sight of something on the side of the road, they immediately stopped to investigate. What they found was a young woman, barely moving, her body sprawled out on the cold pavement. The driver quickly called 911, alerting authorities to the scene. Within minutes, other drivers had pulled over, their headlights shining on the disturbing sight. The woman was unrecognizable, lying in the cold, struggling to breathe. Her face was pale, her body bruised, and she appeared to be unconscious. The witnesses were horrified, unable to process what they were seeing. There was no sign of what had happened to her, just the grim reality that someone was lying in front of them, fighting to stay alive. At exactly 9:12 p.m., the first police unit arrived at the scene. The officers quickly exited their vehicles, flashlights scanning the area. It was clear that this wasn't an ordinary accident. The woman they found on the road was Lauren Burke, though her identity wasn't immediately known. Officers quickly radioed for paramedics who arrived soon after. They immediately began working on Lauren, their focus razor sharp. Her pulse was weak, barely there, and it was clear she had been badly injured. Paramedics lifted Lauren onto a stretcher and rushed her to East Alabama Medical Center. Time was critical. As they worked tirelessly to stabilize her, the severity of her injuries became painfully apparent. Lauren had suffered a gunshot wound. The bullet had entered her body at close range, causing extensive damage. The medical team did everything they could, but the damage was too severe. Despite their best efforts to save her, Lauren's life hung by a thread. After about an hour of intense medical intervention, she was pronounced dead. Her bright future, the life she had ahead of her, was stolen in a matter of hours. As Lauren's family and friends were left in shock, authorities began their investigation into the crime. They would soon find that Lauren's death wasn't just a random tragedy. It was part of a much darker story that would unfold in the days to come. Courtney Lockhart was 23 years old when he became the center of a shocking investigation. Before this tragedy, he seemed like any other guy trying to find his way, but things were far from normal. Born in October 1984, Lockhart had a history that would later become a key part of understanding his violent actions. Lockhart had served in the U.S. Army, but his time in the military was marked by trouble. After his discharge in 2006, his life seemed to fall apart. Those who knew him before said he had changed dramatically. He became paranoid, withdrawn, and lost the easygoing nature he once had. His family noticed the shift, with his mother recalling how her son no longer smiled and would even hide under beds or in closets, feeling like someone was always watching him. By 2008, Lockhart was far from the person he used to be. His relationships were strained, and his behavior had become more erratic. His girlfriend had left him, and he was no longer in contact with his young daughter. He was living in a constant state of instability, moving through life without any clear direction. But his behavior didn't just stop at emotional withdrawal. He had started to act out in dangerous ways. In the months leading up to Lauren's death, Lockhart had been involved in a string of violent crimes, mostly targeting women. He'd been stealing from cars and attempting to carjack people in parking lots. His violent tendencies were escalating, and he was no longer hiding the darkness inside him. Though Lauren had no direct connection to Lockhart, He crossed paths with her in the most violent of ways. What exactly led him to target her that night remains unclear, but what followed was a tragedy that no one saw coming. As soon as Lauren's family got the first hint that something was wrong, panic hit hard. It started when the police called Lauren's father, James, at around 9:40 p.m. on March 4th, 2008. They told him that his daughter's car was found engulfed in flames on Auburn University's campus. But the most unsettling part was that there was no sign of Lauren. James, trying to stay calm, immediately began calling her phone. It rang, but there was no answer, just the same cold silence. Each call only made his stomach sink further. He tried reaching out to Lauren's friends, hoping someone would have seen her or heard from her, but no one had. Everyone was as clueless as he was. James's anxiety grew with every passing minute. He called Lauren's mom, Vivian, and shared the news, both of them growing more and more fearful. Vivian quickly started trying to contact Lauren, but each call went straight to voicemail. She had no idea where Lauren was or what was happening. There was no sign of her in the places she should have been. It was as though she had vanished. The panic didn't stop there. Vivian and James both turned to Sean, Lauren's boyfriend, hoping he might have some answers. Sean was equally frantic. He had just seen Lauren a few hours earlier before she left to go to the library for her study session with Michael. Sean had no idea what could have happened, but his worry was palpable. He quickly made calls to Lauren's friends, hoping someone could tell him more about what had happened that night, but no one had seen or heard from Lauren after she left him. When he learned that Lauren had abruptly canceled her meeting with Michael, a knot tightened in his chest. It wasn't like her to forget such things, especially when she had always been so dependable. Her voice on the phone sounded rushed and strange when she spoke to Michael. It made Sean's gut churn. He felt something wasn't right, but with no one else having any answers, he had no idea how to proceed. All he could do was wait and hope that the night would turn around. But as the hours passed, that hope began to fade. With each minute, their worst fears started to feel more like a reality. No one knew where Lauren was or what had happened to her. By the time the police arrived at the scene where Lauren's body was found, they knew they were dealing with something serious. The first responders' immediate concern was not just the injured woman, but the potential for foul play. Lauren's injuries, her unconscious state, her lack of identification, pointed to a situation far beyond an accident. She had been lying on the cold pavement, barely breathing, with no clear sign of how she had ended up there. But they did know one thing for certain. She wasn't there by choice. As the paramedics rushed her to East Alabama Medical Center, officers started canvassing the area. Witnesses had already started to give statements. They'd seen a young woman in distress on the road, but none of them had seen what had happened. No one knew who she was yet, but it was clear from the beginning that this was no simple case. Police immediately began to look for connections. They quickly learned the victim was Lauren Burke when they identified the car that had been found burning on Auburn University's campus. Investigators began their work by searching through the remains of the Honda Civic, which had been destroyed by fire. Inside, they found remnants of Lauren's items: her wallet, a partially melted camera, and other belongings that helped confirm the vehicle's ownership. But the most telling discovery came from underneath the front seat: a .38 caliber bullet. The bullet was a shocking clue. It confirmed that Lauren had been shot inside the vehicle before the fire had been set, an attempt to destroy any evidence of the crime. That single discovery took the investigation to a much darker level. At the same time, detectives began to look for any witnesses who might have seen anything unusual that night. The priority was figuring out where Lauren had been between the time she left Sean and when she was found. They soon found that Lauren had used her bank card just after she had been attacked, and the person using it wasn't her. This piece of evidence shifted the investigation. Someone had been with Lauren after the attack, and they had access to her personal belongings. As the investigation continued, the police began to focus on people who might have had contact with Lauren that night. Sean and Michael, as the last known people to have seen her, were questioned. Both were cleared of any involvement, though the unusual phone call between Lauren and Michael still bothered investigators. It was odd that she had said she forgot about their study meeting, especially when it was something she'd planned earlier. That didn't sit right with them. They had to dig deeper. Then they started looking at people with a history of violence. Courtney Lockhart, a man with a criminal history and a known pattern of aggression, became the key suspect. Police learned that just before the attack on Lauren, Lockhart had been involved in several violent acts, including attempted carjackings. The timing was chilling. Investigators began to realize that Lockhart's violent tendencies were escalating, and Lauren was one of his unfortunate victims. The discovery of his involvement would soon be confirmed, and it would change everything. Detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together every detail. They gathered more evidence, interviewed more witnesses, and slowly began to put the story together. What had started as a tragedy in the quiet streets of Auburn would soon reveal a dangerous criminal and an act of violence that would haunt Lauren's family and friends forever. Courtney Lockhart wasn't a stranger to trouble. Born in 1984, he had served in the U.S. Army but was discharged after multiple offenses. His life took a downward turn after his military career ended in 2006. People who knew him before said he was a different person, someone who was once carefree but became increasingly paranoid and withdrawn. He stopped visiting his daughter, cut off relationships, and started acting erratically. By 2008, Lockhart had become someone to fear. He'd been involved in multiple violent incidents, mostly targeting women. His crimes ranged from carjackings to thefts, and there was no sign of him slowing down. It seemed like nothing mattered to him anymore. He was spiraling deeper into violence and criminal behavior. But his path led him to Lauren Burke. There was no connection between Lauren and Lockhart, but that didn't stop him from targeting her. He had been on a dangerous path for months, and on March 4th, 2008, Lauren became one of his victims. It didn't take long for investigators to find critical clues. After Lauren's body was discovered, police immediately started piecing together the details of what happened. They found the bullet under the front seat of her burned car, confirming she had been shot inside before the fire was set. That alone told them this wasn't just a random crime, it was personal. But what pushed the case forward was the discovery of Lauren's bank card. Someone had used it after she was found, and that someone was likely the key to everything. Investigators dug into her financial records, tracing the card's use, and soon enough, they had a name: Courtney Lockhart. The breakthrough came when they matched his criminal history and known behavior with the pattern of violence surrounding Lauren's death. Investigators also found security footage from nearby areas showing Lockhart in the vicinity of Auburn University the night Lauren was attacked. The pieces were falling into place. Soon after, Lockhart was tracked down and arrested. What followed was his shocking confession. Lockhart admitted to kidnapping and murdering Lauren Burke. The confession, combined with the mounting evidence, sealed his fate. It was a dramatic turn in the investigation. What began as a tragic mystery was now a case of a violent criminal who had been on a rampage, finally caught and forced to face the consequences. Courtney Lockhart's capture came after a dramatic sequence of events. He had been on the run after his violent crime spree, but on March 7th, just days after Lauren's death, Lockhart's time ran out. Police tracked him down to a Walmart parking lot in Noonan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn. He had just attempted to abduct an elderly woman, but he was caught in the act by a witness who called 911. Lockhart, realizing he was being followed, tried to escape by abandoning the stolen vehicle and running into the nearby woods. A high-speed chase followed, with officers closing in on him. Eventually, Lockhart's car broke down, and he made a desperate attempt to flee on foot. But his plan backfired when an officer crashed into the door of Lockhart's vehicle, giving officers the time they needed to catch up and apprehend him. Lockhart was taken into custody without further incident. When questioned, Lockhart didn't put up a fight. His behavior was calm, almost resigned. He confessed to kidnapping and murdering Lauren Burke. His chilling confession confirmed what investigators had suspected all along: that Lauren had fallen victim to a man whose violent behavior had been building for months. Lauren's family and friends were left to pick up the pieces after the loss of a young woman full of potential. The pain of her death rippled through Auburn University, where she had been well-liked and admired. Her friends and sorority sisters were devastated, struggling to understand how something so violent could happen to someone like her. The legal proceedings that followed brought a sense of closure, but it didn't make the pain go away. Lockhart was charged with the murder of Lauren Burke. His trial was a tense, emotional affair, with Lauren's family and friends attending, hoping for justice. When the verdict was read, Lockhart was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. It was a step toward justice, but no sentence could bring Lauren back or undo the damage caused by his actions. The media coverage was intense. News outlets covered every detail of the case, and Lauren's story became a symbol of how quickly things can change. It also served as a reminder of the dangers that can lurk, even in a quiet college town. The community was left shaken, but in the end, there was relief that the person responsible for such a violent crime was behind bars. Lauren's murder left a hole in her family's hearts and in the Auburn community. It was a tragedy that forever changed those who knew her. But her death also sparked conversations about violence, the need for better mental health support, and how dangerous unchecked behavior can be. As of now, Courtney Lockhart remains in prison, serving his sentence for the brutal crime he committed. This case stands as a stark reminder of how fragile life can be and how quickly everything can change. If you found this story important, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video with others. Let's continue to remember Lauren and others like her, and keep the conversation about justice alive.